Hi everyone. In today's session, we'll be looking at the if function in general. I hope this helps who requested for the video session and many more persons. So what this person wants is to change the old values as you can see on the screen to the new value. We already have the if function used there to solve the problem. I did a video in my previous session solving this in entirety, but I'm just going to use this to explain the if function. We can see all possible options. So I've done a slide that we can use to further explain the if function. Please take note of all possible options. We have the hardly, always, sometimes, fairly often, and the blank space. So let's go to the slide. This flowchart diagram is used to explain the movement of the if function that was used to solve the problem of changing the old values to the new values. As you can see, the arrow representations, green is for yes, red is for no. Then see the flowchart symbols, you have the terminal, decision, and process. So when you start, it starts by asking you a question. Is the old value hardly? If yes, take one, then stop. That's break the operation. If no, check if it is always. If yes, it is always, take two, then stop. If not, check if it is sometimes. If it is sometimes, take three, then stop. Else, check if it is fairly often. So the green arrows are more of a yes, then the red arrows are no. You can see this last part where after checking for the last possible option, as after it had checked for every single thing, where it checked for the blank. So you see that when it doesn't go with the blank, it takes a zero. Zero is the default value that I want it to take if it doesn't fit any of the possible options. So after I've changed all the values and I see a zero in my new values, I should know that it didn't fit any of the possible options. If you should not put a value here, if I didn't put this zero here, it's going to be a false. Excel automatically gives it a false, telling you that it didn't fit other options. But since we are working with numbers, I decided to put a zero as my default value. After which it says yes, then stop. I hope this diagram explains it in a bit. Let's now look at the formula itself and how we added it together. Okay, so first of all, we are making a if function for all of them. You can see the individual if function for the options. You have if A2. So we're working with A2. Let's assume we're on Excel now. So we'll say if A2 is equals hardly, you should take 1 or put a 0. If A2 is equals always, you should take 2 and we'll put a 0. This applies to all of them. Then combining it is where the problem comes. This is where people have issues. It's more like a yes or a no, but now this is now nested into each other, just like we saw on the chart. Everything that was explained using the flowchart is what goes on in this formula, this long formula you see here. So let's look at the steps that was used to combine it. I use this color so that you can know when another formula is inserted, like when we get to the next stage of decision, just like we saw hardly, always, and the rest of them. First of all, we'll say if A2 is equals hardly, it should take 1 If not, you should put a 0. Then in the second step, we are saying if A2 is equals hardly, you should take 1. But if it's not equals hardly, you shouldn't take a 0. You should ask the question of the always. And for it to ask the question for always, it has to bring in the if function for always. You can see it's in green. It brought in the entire if function for always. So it's now asking if A2 is equals to always, you should take 2, then put a 0. So now in the next step, we're now saying after checking for hardly and always, we don't want it to take a 0 if it doesn't apply to always, as explained in the flowchart. We want it to check for sometimes. As you can see, it's now asking, instead of putting a 0 as the false, it's asking another question. Is A2 equals sometimes? If yes, put a 3. If no, put a 0. And please notice that for every new question it asks, there's a closing bracket to it. You can see that the initial one has 1 closing bracket. This one now has 2 because you can see the starting of this green, see the starting here and see the ending of the green. Then for this one where it asks for sometimes and it has a 3, then if it's false, it's taking a 0. We're now saying this is not the last possible option. We want to still check for another option, which is where we are checking for fairly often. We're now replacing this 0 here with the question or the if function for fairly often. We're saying check if A2 is equal to fairly often. If yes, put in a 4. If no, you put in a 0 and we're closing the bracket. But now, this is not the last possible option. We have another option, which is the blank. So we're now saying, don't take a 0. If A2 is equal to blank, then take 5. If not, take a 0. Since this is our last possible option, 0 is now the default if it doesn't match any of the options. But if we should leave this and not put a 0 here, Excel will automatically give you false as explained earlier. By the way, this is a nested if function. I hope this explanation so far would help you when you're creating your own nested if function. This seems pretty straightforward because it's more like a straight line decision consideration. I say this because there are some if functions that are like a branched tree, where after agreeing that A2 is equals hardly and is a yes, you now have to consider what type of hardly it is. I'll be doing the next video that would throw more light on that to help us in case we have to do a nested if function that has that kind of flow. Thank you very much for your time. Do have a lovely day.